The last thing my grandmother ever said to me was, "You'll do fine, Thayer." I lied and told her I believed it. I didn't. I just held her hand and let the machines beep slower and slower. That was 5 days ago. Now I was sitting in an ice-cold conference room across from Eldon Price, her lawyer. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours since the funeral, but my father looked fresh off the golf course. Gareth Cole treated grief like a chore. Check the box. Move along. Eldon cleared his throat and read the will. Agnes left everything to me. Not some sentimental trinket or a slice of the pie. Everything. Her estate, her assets, her corporate interests. Total value, $14.6 billion. My ears rang. Marla, my stepmother, did this slow blink like she'd been slapped with a velvet glove. Breck, my half-brother, asked how soon we could redeploy the dry powder, like we were divvying up Monopoly cash. They didn't even pretend to hide it. Gareth leaned in, elbows on the glass table, and said I'd sign it all over to him tonight. Called it the responsible move. Said I wasn't equipped for the pressure. That didn't sound like concern. It sounded like a warning. I looked him straight in the eye and said no. That was it. No long speech. Just no. Eldon didn't blink. Gareth did. Back at the house, they had lights on like a press conference. I walked in and saw a manila folder already waiting on the counter. Gareth pushed it toward me. Said he was offering 11% if I relieved myself of undue burden. Called it mercy. I told him I was doing what Grandma asked. He looked at me like I was the dumbest man alive and said I had 22 minutes to pack. I stood there like a frozen idiot for the first two of them. Breck watched with this little smirk, already planning where he'd put his stupid NFT art on the walls. Upstairs, I yanked open the top drawer of my dresser and found the little brass key Agnes gave me last winter. Just in case, she'd said. I'd forgotten all about it until that moment. I slipped it into my pocket and zipped up a single duffel bag. Near midnight, I pulled up to her old mansion in Hawthorne. It used to be a textiles office or some industrial thing. Now it looked like a relic holding its breath. The iron gates opened as I rolled up. Silas Boone, the house manager, was already at the door. Tall guy, maybe mid-60s, sharp eyes, but calm. He looked me up and down once and said, "Agnes told me, if you come like this, you don't sleep here alone." Then he stepped aside. Quick note. Before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. Silas handed me a mug of coffee so steady it felt like a signal. No small talk, just coffee, eggs, and space to breathe. He told me Camille Shore would be arriving shortly, and that he'd already looped in Eldon. I hadn't even put on socks yet. By the time I got to the study, Camille was standing by the fireplace like she'd lived in that room for years. Black slacks, calm eyes, no wasted words. She handed me a printed diagram and said, "This is how your grandmother structured it." The trust was irrevocable, not symbolic, not flexible, set in stone. I couldn't sign control over to anyone, not if I changed my mind, not even if I ended up drooling in a care home. The words non-transferable, non-assignable, insulated by intent were printed in bold on line 3. "There's more," Camille said, pointing to a second clause circled in red. She added a good faith trigger. "If any party attempts to pressure or coerce you, 18% of that quarter's net dividends automatically go to a charitable sub-fund for victims of financial abuse. No board approval needed. It's a direct carve-out." I blinked at her. "You're saying, if they try to muscle me, they cost themselves?" She nodded once. "That's exactly what Agnes intended," Eldon added. "And any documents you sign under duress, nullified automatically. The moment pressure is proven, the paper dies. No court fight required. The trust self-corrects." It was the first time I'd heard a lawyer describe something as self-correcting. It should have calmed me. Instead, I felt this slow wave of heat under my skin, like I was grateful and furious at the same time. Grateful to Agnes for protecting me, furious that she even had to. Silas lowered the lights and pulled a screen from the wall. Eldon clicked a remote, and suddenly, there she was. Agnes, my grandmother. Not filtered, not rehearsed. Just her, sitting in the parlor with her hair pulled back, wearing that navy cardigan she only brought out when something serious was coming. She said my name like she was still in the room. Thayer. Just that. Once. And then she turned, looking straight at the camera. Gareth. She didn't yell, didn't accuse. She just listed dates: January 7th, June 21st, October 10th. Times when Gareth had asked, not really asked, for access to capital, strategic pooling, advanced distributions, partial custodial powers. She never called them loans. She didn't have to. I told you no, she said, voice level. Every time I told you no. So now I'm putting it in writing. The air in the study got heavy. Even Silas shifted his stance. I kept staring at the screen like I could rewind her face just to hear it again. Then she said it. Thayer never asked me for a nickel. He asked for my time. I didn't say anything, but my throat pulled tight like it was trying not to break. When the video ended, Camille picked up again like nothing had cracked. She pointed to another part of the diagram and said, "This outlines decision-making. You're not obligated to form any family advisory board. No shared control. No temporary governance handovers. This is a one-person stewardship." Eldon slid me a sheet of paper. "This summarizes your rights. Read it, memorize it, carry it." I looked up. "He's not going to take this quietly," Camille answered like she already knew how loud Gareth could get. "We'll be calm," Eldon's voice followed, sharper. "We'll be exact." I folded the paper once, then again, tucked it into my back pocket like armor. In my front pocket, the little brass key dug against my thigh. I still didn't know what it opened. But I knew it was part of whatever came next. I didn't even make it to the bottom of my coffee before I heard tires on gravel, 4 vehicles. Gareth's black sedan, Marla's white SUV, Breck's red coupe with the tinted windows, and a muffler loud enough to be embarrassing. Then a gray van with no plates and a magnetic logo that read Family Solutions Collective. It looked like a kidnapping disguised as a retreat. Silas glanced at me, nodded once, and said, "Stay in the study, I'll open the door." He didn't raise his voice, didn't even sound tense, but something about how he straightened his collar told me this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a move, a push. I stayed by the window and watched them pile out. The PR guy, young, slick, probably hired off a podcast, held a leather briefcase like he was walking into a shareholder call. The so-called family counselor looked like a retired therapist who'd read too many airport paperbacks on influence. Marla wore a navy wrap dress and way too much perfume. I could smell it through the front hallway. Breck was last out, dragging his feet and trying to look detached, like this wasn't his circus. Gareth led the way. Of course he did. They came in like they'd practiced it. Marla did the slow walk scan of the room, like she was appraising furniture. The PR guy handed Silas a folder labeled Emergency Management Authorization. I saw it from where I stood. Cheap clip art crest, 2 typos in the letterhead, and a signature line already filled out in ballpoint. "This isn't a takeover," the PR guy said, smiling like we were all in on the joke. "It's just about optics. A smooth, clean transition. Minimal exposure, mutual cooperation." Marla stepped closer and dabbed the corner of her eye with a monogrammed handkerchief. "You'll wilt under this, Thayer. There's no shame in knowing your limits." I stepped out of the study. My hands were cold, but my jaw locked up tight. I didn't yell. I just said one word. "No." It shook when I said it, but it still came out whole. Eldon stepped forward from the side hallway like he'd been waiting for that cue. "The trust is insulated. He cannot assign, delegate, or surrender control, even under emotional pressure. Section 14, paragraph 3. Camille was already holding the remote. She hit play. The wall lit up with Agnes again. Same parlor, same calm tone, no edits. She looked dead into the camera and said, "Gareth, if you are standing in my house arguing, you have already crossed a line." Silas didn't flinch. Gareth didn't speak. The PR guy tried to talk over her voice, but it was pointless. She wasn't dramatic. She was deliberate. Every word landed heavier than a lecture, and then the front door creaked open again. I turned toward the sound and saw Judge Arlen Pike walk in like the building belonged to him. He was retired but still carried himself like he was under oath. No fanfare, no folder, just presence. "Enough," he said, flat and clear. "Any further attempts to interfere with this estate will constitute harassment. The house is protected. The trust is immutable. There are cameras. This is documented." Nobody spoke right away. It was like he'd slapped the whole room with calm. Gareth narrowed his eyes but didn't say a word. Marla adjusted her necklace. Breck tried to pull off a smirk and couldn't finish it. The PR guy checked his watch like time had betrayed him. Then some local pastor they must have dragged along stepped forward and said a short, misplaced prayer about humility and family loyalty. It felt like a weapon dressed in scripture. They left 2 minutes later, No papers signed, no voices raised, just a group of people walking out with less dignity than they came in with. When the door shut behind them, the whole house felt like it let out a breath. I leaned against the table and looked down at my hands. They were clenched tight enough to hurt. I didn't even realize until Silas walked by and placed a glass of water next to me. No words, just a glass. I took a long sip and finally exhaled. The next 2 weeks were a steady drip of noise. I counted 47 messages from Gareth alone, some guilt, some threats, a few dressed up like advice. I didn't delete a single one. I saved every single message, screenshot, voicemail, and urgent email. Marla sent calendar invites for something she called a family reconciliation meeting at a downtown hotel. The invite included a notary and a PR liaison. I replied with one line, "Happy to meet, with counsel present." They declined and called me paranoid. Breck posted a story on his socials, tight little graphic with my face blurred, calling me a paper thief hoarding family equity. Real dramatic. Silas didn't flinch. He walked straight to the office, pulled gate camera stills from the morning they showed up with that bogus document kit, and printed every timestamp. Eldon told me to keep those in a labeled folder. I did. Then came the cousin play. A guy I hadn't heard from in 7 years forwarded me a PDF he got in a group chat titled Draft Power of Stewardship. My name was at the top, Gareth's signature at the bottom. The whole thing looked like it was written by a paralegal with a fever. Eldon took one glance and circled 3 spelling errors and 2 made-up statute numbers. "It's not even good fiction," he said. Looking back, I should have seen the next angle coming. The health scare. Classic move. Gareth sent me a photo of his blood pressure cuff reading, systolic in the 170s, with the caption, "You're killing your father. Hope it's worth it." It hit weird, but not deep. Camille had already put structure in place. 3 scheduled check-ins a week. 1 walk through Agnes's museum rooms. No solo meetings with family, no matter who asked. I kept to that rhythm like it was a heartbeat. Judge Pike suggested I speak to a local cop, not to report anything, just to document. The officer's name was Riggs. He listened, nodded, told me not to escalate. When people like that see they can't push you, they switch tactics. Don't chase, just record. So I did. Somewhere in the middle of that noise, the first fund docket landed on my desk. Agnes had already pre-approved a grant for restoring the town's old library and another for a rail museum partnership. I initialed both, didn't second guess it. Felt right. One night around 2:30, I found myself sitting on the floor of the upstairs hall, turning that brass key over in my hand, like it might answer something. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe not an answer, maybe just a next move. Silas walked past, paused, then said, "Agnes put things where people like your father wouldn't think to look." I looked up. "You mean like the vault?" He shook his head. "No, I mean books, not safes." That stuck. He walked off, and I stayed on the floor, key in hand, already thinking about the bindery upstairs. Silas didn't say much the next morning. He just brought me upstairs to the mezzanine, past the museum room, into a narrow hallway that curved toward the back of the house. I'd passed that door a dozen times and never opened it. The brass knob stuck slightly, like it hadn't turned in years. "This was her bindery," he said. "She restored books here. Told me once it was the only place she let her hands get stained." The room smelled like old paper and lemon oil. 3 walls were lined with shelves, some holding antique tomes, others filled with flat boxes and thread spools. A long table sat in the center, with a stitched leather blotter and a metal desk lamp bent low. Behind a row of cracked ledgers on the far shelf sat a steel lockbox, small, matte gray. 1 tiny keyhole, no label. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. It slid in smooth and turned without resistance. Inside were 3 neat stacks of paper tied with faded ribbon, letters, dated, labeled, and, knowing Agnes, copied more than once. Each one listed an amount, a reason, and a response. Gareth had called them bridges, temporary holds, or family consolidations. They were loans in all but name, off-book advances, 19 total, stretched over 14 years. One letter had a paperclip holding a photocopy of a withdrawal slip. I recognized the signature. Gareth's pen always dipped halfway through his last name. At the bottom of the box was a flash drive in a clear plastic sleeve. Agnes had written on the label in her careful script, "For Eldon," if anyone calls you sentimental. I plugged it into the desktop on the work table. No password, no fluff, just 4 audio files numbered. The first voice was Gareth, calm but clipped. Agnes, we need to centralize decision-making. It's not a power grab, it's stability. The second was from a few months later. Again Gareth, pressing harder. You can't leave things open-ended. It confuses the partners. The third had both Gareth and Marla. She said the words optics and asset management like she was reading from a brochure. Then, if we don't have control, we'll be frozen out. The last was short, just Marla. She said, he's a good kid, but he won't last a quarter. You have to think long-term, Agnes. I pulled the headphones off and sat back. My jaw hurt. I hadn't realized I'd been clenching it. We brought the letters and drive down to Eldon, who cross-checked dates against his own appointment logs. Silas opened a leather-bound visitor log Agnes kept near the back stairwell. Every single date matched. Judge Pike's advice had been clear. 2 independent sources. We had them. Eldon didn't get loud or theatrical. He just stood, walked to his desk, and started typing. He filed a notice with the county prosecutor and a sealed petition for a protective order. Kept it all by the book. No headlines, no drama, just process. Camille came in later that afternoon and walked me through another piece I hadn't fully understood. Agnes had wrapped the mansion in a structure that made it more than a museum. It was the anchor property for a Rail Heritage Endowment package, connected to grants and co-sponsor agreements. If anyone tried to shut it down, even for safety or review, it would trigger clawbacks and full audits. That wouldn't just be messy, she said. It would pull heat onto any co-signed projects within the last 2 fiscal years. I asked if Gareth had any of those. Several, she said without blinking. We cleared a whole day for scanning. Silas brought up a second desk lamp and a flatbed scanner that hummed like a sewing machine. I handled every letter myself, took the ribbon off each one, aligned the edges, fed them in one by one. Didn't rush. By the time we finished, the sun had dropped below the factory roofs across the yard. I stood, cracked my back, and realized my brain felt quiet. That night, I slept 6 hours straight without waking once. The message came at 2:14 in the morning. Breck, of all people. Let me fix this. Dad's out of control. No greeting, no punctuation, just panic in digital form. He echoed Gareth's phrasing almost word for word. It read like a kid who'd touched the stove and realized it burned both ways. I agreed to meet him the next day at a diner off Route 41, middle of nowhere. Plastic booths, fake wood counters, laminated menus. He was already there when I walked in. No sunglasses, no fake smile, just bags under his eyes and a phone face down on the table. He jumped straight in. We need a middle path. You hold title, but I manage the venture wing. I keep the family from exploding. Gareth chills out. Nobody loses. I ordered scrambled eggs and rye toast, mostly so I had something to do with my hands. He leaned forward. We can put it in writing. Nothing binding, just a memo of intent. Show good faith. Calm everybody down. That phrase, good faith, landed wrong. Agnes had built a whole trigger clause around it. Now he was tossing it out like it was his invention. I didn't commit. I said, I'll think about it, which was more generous than I should have been. Later that morning, I showed Eldon the message thread. He didn't even blink. Don't sign a napkin. Don't even nod at a memo. This isn't a deal. It's a setup. So I didn't reply. I didn't write anything. I just went quiet. 2 days later, Gareth's PR guy posted a fake screenshot of an agreement in principle. It had my name, a fabricated header, and a pasted-on signature. Sloppy work. Breck had forwarded our messages. They clipped it, added context that didn't exist, and blasted it online. I didn't yell. I didn't flinch. I just sent a 2-line reply. See you in court. No threats. No argument. Just a marker. Judge Pike called within an hour. He'd already seen the post. Said, let's get ahead of this. Meet me at my office. He arranged for an on-duty judge to be available if needed. I brought printouts. I brought metadata. Breck sent another message that night. Didn't know they'd post it, I'm sorry. It read like a rough draft. I didn't answer. Just flagged it and kept filing my notes. Silas pulled out a hardbound visitor log and set it on a little table by the front door. He said, people write slower than they talk. It helps. I found myself flipping it open once a day, even when nobody came. That's when it hit me. Everyone else was moving fast, burning time like fuel. But I wasn't. I was the only one holding still, and that was the one thing they couldn't plan around. The knock came sharp and impatient, like someone trying to serve a warrant in a movie. I opened the front door myself. A guy in a wrinkled blazer shoved a packet toward my chest and said, "You've been named in an emergency conservatorship petition." I didn't even take it at first. Silas stepped in beside me, posture shifting so fast it felt trained. His shoulders squared, his voice went flat. "Sir, leave the documents on the table and step back from the threshold," he said. The guy hesitated, then dropped the packet on the entry console and backed off. I glanced down at the first page. The formatting was sloppy. Wrong county seal, wrong font size in the header. It was meant to scare, not hold up. Silas closed the door without slamming it. "That crossed a line," he said quietly. 30 minutes later, Camille's email hit my inbox. Subject line, "Trigger activated." She called right after. "Documented coercion has been logged. The trust's good faith trigger executed automatically. 18% of this quarter's net dividends have rerouted to the Financial Abuse Victims Fund." I let that sit for a second. Their push had just redirected millions away from anything they might ever influence. I could almost hear Agnes's dry, satisfied laugh in the back of my head. "So they funded the thing they hate most," I said. "Yes," Camille replied, without touching a single lever. Gareth called within the hour. I put him on speaker but didn't sit down. "You are starving your own blood," he said, voice tight. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "The trust moved on its own," I answered. "You triggered it. That money belongs to this family." "It belongs to the structure Grandma built," I said, and hung up before he could start circling. Eldon moved fast after that. He filed for a temporary protective order the same afternoon. Judge Pike stood present when the on-duty judge reviewed the documents. No speeches, no theatrics. The order was signed clean and served quiet. Marla pivoted to performance. She posted a tearful video about how I had abandoned family values and weaponized grief. It was polished, lighting perfect, comments locked. Camille's team responded with a plain FAQ on the foundation site. Bullet points, citations, dates, no adjectives, just facts. That same week, 12 legal aid cases were funded through the new allocation. I read 3 affidavits myself. Different states, different names, but the language hit familiar. Temporary transfer for stability. Sign here to reduce stress. It was my father's playbook, word for word. At night, I went back up to the bindery. I mended cracked spines and trimmed warped boards under the small desk lamp. There's something about lining up torn pages that steadies your breathing. My hands stayed busy while my head sorted itself out. Looking back, that was the week something shifted. I stopped reacting to their noise and started steering the response. It felt like finding a gear in a machine I hadn't known I was driving. One afternoon, I noticed a new sign taped just inside the front door in Silas's neat block handwriting. No surprise meetings. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't legal language. But every time I walked past it, I felt the house tighten its spine, and I locked the door behind me. I was eating toast in the kitchen when the email landed, from a city clerk I didn't know, flagged as informational. Gareth's firm had filed to temporarily suspend museum operations for an emergency safety review. That was the phrase, soft as tissue on paper, sharp as glass underneath. I forwarded it to Camille and barely finished chewing before she called. "That's not just noise," she said. "It's strategic, but he triggered something he didn't read." She pulled up the covenants within the hour and came over in person. We stood in the study, the house quiet except for the clock ticking by the fireplace. "This house," she said, holding the document in both hands, "is not just a museum. It's the anchor property in the Hawthorne Rail Heritage Package." Agnes tied it to 2 grant lines and 4 private partnerships, including Gareth's own redevelopment filings 2 blocks away. I stared at the printout. "You're saying if he shuts us down?" "Even just on paper," she interrupted. "He forces a full compliance audit on his own project, the one backed by the $62 million commercial loan." That clicked like a lock turning. He thought he was kicking over a folding chair, but it was load-bearing. Eldon handled it like a surgeon. Cold, careful, exact. He notified the grant administrators and copied the city attorney. I watched the email go out with the timestamp blinking on the screen. For the first time that week, I exhaled without thinking about it. Gareth showed up at the next council session looking like he hadn't slept. He tried to spin it as my attack on jobs and irresponsible obstruction. He waved a manila folder like it meant something, but the clerk was ready. She read the clause into the record. Line 10, paragraph 4, subpoint B. If operations were suspended, all co-tied agreements triggered compliance verification across projects within the same urban renewal district. Nobody argued after that. Silas took the whole thing in stride. Turned out he used to manage logistics for a museum fund in Cincinnati. We sat down with clipboards and went room by room for the weekly maintenance schedule. Every bulb checked, every railing tightened, every exterior drain cleared. We logged it all. I wasn't chasing revenge. I wasn't hunting for a win. I was maintaining a house the way Agnes asked. But the way the structure worked, the penalties wrote themselves when someone tried to shake the foundation. A few days later, a handwritten letter showed up. Rail historian from Illinois, thanking Agnes for preserving the depot. Said his dad used to work freight routes through Hawthorne in the 50s. I read it twice and pinned it on the kitchen corkboard next to a faded chili recipe. That same week, Marla's studio lost 2 venue contracts. One of the venues cited risk of public entanglements after the suspension filing made it into the local paper. She left me a voicemail, called me vindictive, said I was dragging her down for sport. I saved it, like the rest. Folder labeled noise. The thing was, I didn't feel like I was fighting. I was just standing still while the house held shape. It didn't swing back. It didn't scream. It just sat there and made other people face what they built. And that, somehow, did more damage than anything I could have planned. The text came at 6:33 a.m. sharp. Breck, I messed up. I can fix it. No emojis, no extras. Then, a second message. Meet me at Judge Pike's office. Courthouse Annex. Not a diner this time. That alone told me something had cracked. I showed up an hour later. Breck was already there, sitting in the corner like he'd lost his wallet and pride in the same week. No entourage, no blazer, no fake calm, just pale skin, damp collar, and a silence I hadn't seen from him before. He stood up but didn't shake my hand. I forwarded the messages, he said. I knew they'd clip it, but I didn't think they'd post a fake header. I should have. And the emergency packet? That was staged. Gareth pushed for it. Marla helped write the language. PR guy filled in the blanks. He opened his phone, scrolled, and handed it to Judge Pike. There was a voice memo from Gareth. I heard it play out with no filter, just his voice in a low, practiced tone. We don't need a signature. We just need something with Thayer's name on it. Forwarded message, whatever. Doesn't have to hold up. Just has to move the needle. Hearing that while Breck sat right there made my stomach turn. Not with shock, just with something slower and heavier. Not betrayal anymore, just confirmation. Judge Pike didn't raise his eyebrows or clear his throat. He just made a short call, and within 30 minutes we had a court reporter and an on-duty magistrate in a side room. Breck gave a statement under oath. Said the date, the actions, and the intent. Eldon stood next to him and marked exhibits without saying more than he had to. Camille sat behind the desk, pen steady, face unreadable. I learned later from Eldon that the county prosecutor opened a narrow inquiry. Not a full-blown case, not yet, but enough to shine light on forged instruments, targeted harassment, and procedural fraud. Nothing for headlines, just pressure in the right places. 2 days later, we published a public statement. No viral thread, no drama, just a clean webpage with a quiet link to Agnes's letters, names redacted where they needed to be. We weren't naming villains. We were showing patterns. Let people make their own conclusions. One of the trade journals picked it up. Article titled, Trust Governance and the Limits of Legacy. They quoted Camille and cited Agnes's design as a model for next-gen fiduciary structures. Honestly, I didn't care about the analysis. I just liked that they called it structure, not drama. Marla posted a subtweet so long it had to be screen-grabbed and reposted. I didn't read it. Went for a walk instead, past the depot, past the edge of town where the streetlights flickered in daylight. News came that Gareth stepped back from 2 nonprofit boards to focus on family matters. A polite way of saying someone told him to sit down until things cooled off. His firm's lender delayed the depot project closing. Not a death blow, but enough to sting. Breck sent one last message. I'm sorry, really, I'm getting a job, paycheck job, warehouse maybe, and I'm done posting. I replied, good start, stick with it. He answered, okay. Nothing else. No smiley faces, no excuses, just okay. That night, I sat at Agnes's old kitchen table. Silas brought in a pot of chili, the kind with too much cumin and not enough tomato. We didn't talk, didn't need to. He handed me a spoon, and we ate straight from the pot. Sometimes quiet was enough. It was that kind of night. Months passed, and I slipped into a pace that finally felt like mine. I spent 2 afternoons a week upstairs in the mezzanine bindery, trimming cloth, gluing spines, stitching thread through fold after fold. It made my hands useful and my head quiet. The rest of the time, I handled what needed handling. I didn't chase anything I didn't need. The fund's first major disbursement went out to a small but tight network, helping people say no without losing their roof or phone. We backed a 24-hour hotline, 3 legal clinics, and a modest grant for a shelter that gets more of these cases than most people ever hear about. It wasn't dramatic. It worked. Another push came from Gareth's side, some masked pressure through an affiliated firm. Camille flagged it, and the good faith trigger activated again. The system handled it without me lifting a finger. It didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like climate control. Automatic, consistent, and impossible to ignore. The museum stayed open, fully compliant. We launched a small exhibit called Ledger and Letters. It was about pressure and choices, not names or blame. I stood in the back and watched people read. They stood longer than I expected. Some nodded. 1 or 2 wiped their eyes. I sipped burnt coffee and thought about Agnes humming over her garden rose, always humming the same tune without needing a reason. Gareth sent me a 1-line message on a Sunday. "You've ruined me." I didn't answer. That kind of sentence isn't meant for a reply. It wants oxygen. I didn't give it any. Marla sent a long email dressed up as an apology. By paragraph 3, it had turned into a list of everything I'd done wrong since childhood. I archived it with the rest. Breck sent a photo of a pay stub from a warehouse job, his name in the top left, time card signed in blue ink. He said he was learning to be on time. I texted him back. That's a good start. Judge Pike pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You've done enough." That's how older men say, stop looking for the next shoe. Eldon stayed precise. Camille kept the trust tight and bloodless. Silas checked the boiler like it was sacred and made sure the front steps never iced. I went to Agnes's grave early one gray morning. No speech. I just said out loud, I wasn't brave, I was stubborn. But now I know the difference between love and leverage. I left a small brass bookmark on the stone. Plain and weighted. She always liked simple, well-made things. There's no neat ending here. Gareth's still Gareth. The house still creaks at night. Some mornings I still feel the pull to shrink, to hand over the wheel, but I don't. I walk the hallway, reread the covenants, and make the next call. Revenge doesn't live here, but calm does. Every time they push, it costs them. Every noise they make funds real help for someone who's cornered. That was Agnes's idea. I just followed the binding. I'm a bookbinder. You stitch through the fold, not across the face. If you do it right, the book keeps its shape. That's all I ever wanted, and that's what I kept. Real quick, when pressure hits, do you choose firm boundaries or family demands? Tap hype to boost this. Please subscribe and like, comment good story or your take.